Hello there. Welcome to the Intersection Education Podcast. I'm your host, Corey Haley. Today we're speaking with Armand Doucette, who is one of the world's foremost pracademics and teachers in education for this digital age. He's a leader, inspirational speaker, coach, columnist, and author. He's spoken to tens of thousands of teachers on every continent and key international organizations. He's received multiple awards like the Governor General Award for Teaching Excellence and the Canadian Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence as well. Now, in this interview, I need to apologize because we had some internet connection issues and sometimes it's a bit choppy, but we think it still works. And you know what? In a pure COVID moment, we were both at home, and so sometimes you can hear our kids in the background, and so those are pretty familiar noises if you're an early years teacher or if you've got some kids of your own at home. Now, if you like what you're hearing, connect with us. You can go to our website at intersectioneducation.com. You can follow us on Twitter at intersectioned, and we're even on Facebook. And you know what? We really appreciate it when you rate us on iTunes, or more importantly, you just tell your friends about us. So thanks a lot. Here's my conversation with Armand Doucette. The Intersection Education Podcast. Schools are the place where different institutions, services, and societal influences meet. In other words, they're at the intersection of children's lives. In the Intersection Education Podcast, we speak with insiders and outsiders of the education world to try to gain new insight and improve our schools. Armand Doucette, thanks for joining us today. How are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me, Corey.
Hey, I'm happy to have you on. We've been trying to work this out, so I'm looking really forward to it. I want to start just talking generally about teaching, and I know that you've been quoted as saying and calling teaching a calling. I'm wondering, what are some of the events in your life that led you to realize that you wanted to become a teacher, and why you kind of think that teaching is a calling?
That's a good question, Corey. It started off with I've always been sort of in the profession in some ways. I've been a soccer coach since the age of 14 or 13. It's been so long now, and I've coached most of my life, which in some ways is teaching just through sports. But also, I've had the opportunity to have some mentors throughout my life within my family and within the Moncton region that have really had an influence on my life. And as I progressed as a soccer coach, and as my leadership skills progressed as well through some other mediums, I realized that, you know what, the largest impact that I could have is by becoming a teacher and helping others sort of find their passions. So I think that's sort of how it came about. Obviously there's some stories on when I started to realize when that happened. But in terms of the second part of that question, in terms of a calling, I think it almost needs to be in many ways, because when you are teaching, it's a 24/7 job. You don't have any time off. You're always on, particularly now with COVID-19. But it's the old way of looking at it as being a role model for students, wherever you are, whenever they see you. Everything is a teachable moment. So it is a calling, but it is also a profession. And we got to watch out when we use the word calling, because oftentimes people take advantage of that. And we've seen that across the world where, teachers that are volunteering their time because they do believe it's important, but then we mandate them to volunteer their time. So it's stuff that we need to think about as we go forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think that we do need to be careful with that, back and forth of protecting our profession. And yeah, we're helping out kids, but that's interesting you bring that up. I know that you have done a lot of work and you continue to do a lot of work with teachers globally. And I'm wondering, are you seeing that as an issue right now, that whole idea of teachers being taken advantage of, especially in COVID, or do you think that it's kind of been the same before and after the pandemic?
It's funny you ask that. I don't know if it's in COVID or if it's interesting because globally I've been in a lot of conversations, particularly in the last 2 weeks with World Teacher Day and World Education Week and Global Forum for the OECD, and there's so many others that in the last couple of weeks. And I think it's common to hear teachers say that, they're answering teams at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night to make sure that kids are aware of what's going on, and they are going door to door to deliver meals during COVID. There's meetings at all hours and to try to get caught up, professional development, being able to do the assessment when needed. So, right, the medical profession at this moment are doing double the overtime. The difference is that we're on fixed salaries and that you get paid a certain amount, and teachers do get paid well in Canada. There's no question there. Can we get paid better? Yes, definitely. But we do get paid for those 185 or 190 days, depending on where you are. And that's mapped out at sort of 40 to 50 hours a week, really. But the reality for teaching when you're on, it's anywhere between 60 to 90, if you're honest. And COVID, I would add, was probably more, depending on how you're approaching it from a school perspective. So we are talking about student wellness and we're talking about community wellness, but burnout of teachers is real in many areas, and you're seeing early retirement happening all over the world. You're also seeing young teachers that are having this to face and at the start of their career and realizing, okay, this is not what I signed up for. So I think we're going through an interesting time. And depending on how we take care of the teacher workforce who takes care of the students, you could see the teacher issue of 2030 of having 69 million teachers that we are going to be missing by 2030 to reach SDG 4. That could amplify quite quickly, depending on how we approach it.
Yeah, I'm really worried about that whole issue of taking care of teachers right now as well. I think that teachers are struggling with workload issues. I think that they're struggling with their own mental health issues, feelings of isolation. They're cohorting up with their school and their students, and so they feel they can't cohort with their family. And I think that there's also additional burdens that's being put on teachers because of the mental health of their students, and they're supporting that. And I feel like at times they're feeling like Atlas a little bit, and they've got the weight of all of those students, their overall health and their learning on their shoulders. What are you seeing in terms of that, in terms of mental health? What are you seeing in terms of the response of teachers to support students right now through this pandemic?
To answer that first part of the question, I think you hit it on a nail right there in terms of it is quite isolating for a teacher, particularly at the younger grades in terms of elementary and middle school, where oftentimes you don't have a lot of co-teaching happening. You might have professional learning communities with other teachers within your grade level, but the reality is you're usually alone in the classroom. High school, you're starting to see more multidisciplinary approaches, but again, it could be isolating. But with prep time, you at least have a time to chat, right? So traditionally, prep time in elementary and middle school comes after school. So I think you are seeing that Atlas in terms of having the weight of the world on your shoulders, and I completely agree with you when it comes to their families as well. None of us want to bring home COVID-19 from being at school and then interacting with our parents and having us being the reason why, right? So I think as people sort of realize how quickly this disease spreads, you might be in the orange zone or in the yellow zone, but for teachers, you might actually be pushing yourself in the other one just to make sure that you protect your family life, right? I think another element to that is also that the workforce is predominantly female, particularly in elementary and middle school. And they also a lot of them have young families. And now you have to realize that okay, they got to monitor what's going on and deliver what's happening there, but at the same time, the family life falls on them as well, and that's another major issue that we're seeing, right? Because as we go forward, there's all sorts of different approaches to it globally, but you have, teachers are going to be forced to come to school, or we're going to deliver from 8 to 5 while they're trying to figure out how are they going to deliver the learning for their own kids, right? So, and I think all families are going through that as well, but a bit harder on the teachers because they have so many students to cover as well. Really approached it with the Maslow before Bloom in terms of wellness, and really gone in and said, you know what, the curriculum is what it is. We're going to deliver what we can. But if we approach it with student wellness and teacher wellness and stay true to that, I've seen some success in terms of that happening. I think you're right, Corey. I really do think that that's going to be a major issue as we progress. And I think school systems have not really reinvented themselves in terms of the school year. Well, we've seen it in professional sports where they've bubbled up and they've figured out some different scheduling and they've done some different things for the playoffs and so on. In school, we've relatively stayed the same. We've seen blended learning, we've seen distance learning, we've seen you're going back to school fully, but we haven't seen, you know what, 2 months in, we're going to give you a week off from kids, and we're going to let you get some professional development, reflect, get some co-teaching together, get some planning, really look at, okay, what worked, what didn't, why, what do we need to focus on going forward with the kids that we have, which would really be a bit more revolutionary, right? I feel like we're still not innovating to the point where we are helping each other out to the fullest extent.
I want to talk to you about another theme or topic that you have spoken about, and this is idea of the importance of community for great teaching. That's changed this whole idea of, what community is and who can even be inside of the community and the support of a community during this pandemic. And I'm just wondering, what have you seen for the schools that are doing it right? Schools that have leading community builders. And that can be inside the school as groups of teachers. That could be, those connections with the outside one. As we switch to remote learning, as we switch to coming back with all these restrictions of who can be inside of a school, the different connections that we can have with school. How have you seen that idea of community and the importance of community for great learning change?
I think it's kind of a two-way street in this situation, Corey. I think as an education system, we've realized that communication is transparent and two-way. It is not just a one-way street anymore. I've also think that we're realizing how much expertise is out there today and how a teacher's role has pivoted in many ways to you are still a content expertise, particularly in high school. But as you go from elementary and middle school, that content expertise changes a bit, right? Because you're teaching so many different subjects, you might not be an expert in all those subjects, but you might be an expert in a couple of them. So as you're progressing through this, you become very much a project manager, but also in charge of that personalization and that advisory role, that mentorship role for those students, and how it touches so many different sides. So the competencies, the skills, the social, emotional, and the curriculum outcomes. And I think that's really evolved over the last 10, 15 years, where we've realized it's not just about curriculum outcomes. Our role is so much larger. Now, has it evolved completely in everything that we've done in terms of pre-service teaching? Are we doing more social working classes? Are we doing more psychology class? Not enough yet. I also don't think our internships have changed enough so that we really concentrate on the art part. There's still a lot of it that's based on classroom management and some other things. But as this evolves, it also means that the community now, you can network and utilize the community as a large part of that whole education. And if we take that proverb, it takes a community to educate a child, or it takes the village to educate a child, or to develop a child, to raise a child, it really becomes a component of the school as the community of learning. So the school should not just be open from 8 to 5. Why can't we use the school for suppers for soup kitchens in the afternoon? Why can't we have kids working on curriculum that has cooking classes that brings in people? Why can't we have schools where, you have mentor teachers that are students in high school helping English second language immigrants coming through, right? Like there's so many elements that could be if we really opened up our thinking in terms of the school as the hub of learning for our whole community. Now, that being said, experiential learning, where we do internships as they go out to these internships, it's also not just about going in to do an internship that usually ends up being a clerk job or getting the coffee or so on. It's really about, let's bring in the expertise that we have and link it to what we are designing as the learning experience for the child. Oftentimes when we brought in the community before, it would be one-off programs. Somebody's coming through with a presentation. We think it's good. It's oftentimes not fitted in what they are learning or what the projects they're doing. So it's really about connecting at the right time for the right reasons and leveraging what we have in our community.
Yeah, and I just see, I see a lot of barriers to that. I think that there were some schools that were moving in the right directions, and then the pandemic hit. But I've been so happy with some of those internships and some of the programs that have continued. There was a recent article in kind of a communication media blitz about a Building Futures program that we've got, where kids are going in onto the job sites still. Even though we're in the middle of a pandemic, they can still get that kind of partnership between our trades and our schools and get kids engaged in learning.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's exactly it, right? So for a long period of time, we've pivoted towards, K to 12 and direct university route, and that was the be all end all. And we've tailored our education systems towards that. But if you look at some of the high performing education systems around the world that also not valorize, but value the vocational training as well, and also have a futuristic look at things, right? So many of us don't know what those new jobs are. We talk about all these new jobs, but we've never seen them in action. We've never seen, bioengineering or robotics or AI or data analysis and what those jobs look like. So when kids go back home and they're looking at what profession they want to do, well, oftentimes it's the big five, right? Like it'll be, okay, well, I want to go the medical route, or I want to go into teaching, or I want to go into psych or engineering. But there's no real view on, some of these major professions that are opening up as well. Or what does it mean to become a plumber and owning your own business? What does it mean to be a carpenter today and owning your own business? And we know that those are jobs that do very well, actually. So why is there a stigma for us to, help the kids that are good with their hands to continue in those professions? So I think you're right. You hit it again on the nail, Corey. You're hitting 100 today.
All right. Remember these days, because they don't often happen.
In terms of, what, we do have some thinking to do. And I was in Finland about a year and a half ago, and in Germany at the same time on the same trip. And that's what really kind of opened up my eyes, is their views and the perceptions and the biases weren't really there in terms of, they valued all professions, and which was something that was really interesting when I was walking through there.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, I think that there are ways to get that happening despite it, and that leads me to that. I've got some hope. I've got some hope for what we can do. And speaking of hope, I want to talk about your last book, because I was going through all your material and kind of re-looking at some of your stuff, and I noticed that it's very different. Your latest one, Hope, Where Are You?, is really different. I know that it was released at probably a very different time, and I was just wondering, what are you looking for with that book? What were you looking to say, and why is it so different? What made you kind of tack and go take a completely different route on that book?
Yeah, I'm a bit like the character of the dog in Up, where he sees squirrels and he pivots. I think that's the best way to describe that book. That book came about from because most of my work has been in terms of the teaching profession, protecting public education, how public education is extremely important for democracies, for strong democracies, and giving everybody an opportunity, and that we need to reinforce public education. I think that's sort of what you were thinking about in terms of where I was concentrating on. And Hope, Where Are You takes a full turn because it's a children's book. And yeah, so it came about actually from conversations that we were having in the middle of the pandemic in May or in April. I had friends in New York City that were principal and some teachers there that were going through this, and we're losing colleagues and students and family members. And at the same time, I had a friend of mine in Bergamo, Italy, who's a teacher who had just lost his dad, 3 aunts, and countless other people. Bergamo was really hard hit during that time, and then New York City was hard hit right after. And one of the things that he had said was, we can't lose hope for our children. And I thought to myself, that's brilliant. And so reflective of his personality, being such a giver, and then realizing what he was going through. And that's the line that he used. And I thought to myself, that is probably not how I would react to this. And it made me think, you know what, maybe we can help people have those conversations about hope is still around us. So at the time, a friend of mine had released, with her daughter, who was a graphic artist, had released a children's book, and I called them up and I said, hey, why don't we get together and tell some of the stories we're hearing of students around the world, and some of the pitfalls that could happen, as sort of a warning and an opening as well for parents to have and teachers to have conversations with their students about, hope is not lost and it's still around you. And that's where that children's book came out, actually. What we thought was going to be around 20 pages ended up being 6 beautiful stories that we took from all over the world. We were hoping to write a few more, but then we got sidetracked. But the project took off and got translated in 50 plus languages. It's definitely a still on working project because the translations were done all over the world by English second language speakers that took it into their own languages. We opened it up for coding parts so the kids could code their own stories with it. I think we're closing in on 1.5 million downloads. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it's a free resource for anybody to use anywhere. And you can buy a real hard copy from Amazon, which all the money now goes to UNICEF. It was a UNICEF fundraiser as well, where people could give a donation if they wanted to help out. So pretty proud of it. I never thought I'd write a children's book. I'll be totally honest with you. And it really hit me in the feels is the best way of saying it. Particularly the last story of Alessandro, that one really hit hard. But it's something that it gave me some creative outlet when I needed it during COVID and some of the darker times as I was speaking to some people all over the world.
Yeah, I just think it's outstanding. And so, if you're listening to this, go grab it. You don't even need to pay anything, but you could, knowing that it's supporting some worthy causes. And I really enjoyed it, and so did my kids. So, yeah, I thought it was great.
I appreciate that. It's you can find it at hopewhereareyou.com for free.
Let's tack into something a little bit different. I'm wondering, because you speak with so many people and you encounter people who are teaching and learning in different countries, is there something that you think about learning in education that you really believe is true, but that you get some pushback on, or when you're speaking, some people disagree with you about this belief that you have?
I think it might be self-pacing guides. And setting up the class that way is probably something that we're seeing some friction within education, or some differences. Obviously, with the world being so polarized at the moment, and how we are evolving. And basically, it used to be the analogy that, we're trying to fix the motor of the airplane while we're in mid-flight, and that's how education systems are trying to pivot. I think it's we've jumped out of the plane and we're trying to fix a parachute with a Swiss Army knife, but without anything. I think that's really the analogy, because at the end of the day, as I'm seeing COVID and what's happening, and being able to create the scaffolding for children to be able to do that, I think is something that sometimes gets some pushback. The second one would probably be when I really talk about education as you having a massive toolkit, and you got to pick the right tool at the right time for the right kid, and that's what teaching is all about. It's not about having one magic pedagogical approach. It's about being able to reach the kid in their zone of proximal development for whatever element you're looking at that point, be it competencies, skills, curriculum outcomes, social emotional. There's so many layers to our jobs that it really isn't just about getting them to reach a certain curriculum outcome. And if that's what it is, then we're not doing it properly. And I think I get more pushback from sectors outside of education on that one. The ones that try to strip down education to, okay, it's all the learning is about just reaching these curriculum outcomes. And oftentimes we'll get that from ed tech that are trying to push something, or we might get that from the business world that are, with austerity measures, are trying to strip down education to its bare minimum, particularly now with COVID-19 and some of the responses we're seeing as we're progressing through this. So I think that's where I probably get the most pushback, Corey. It's not necessarily within the profession itself, because everybody has the way to approach it. And I think we understand the nuances of it, some days better than most. But I think it's from outside the profession and outside education in terms of what is education really.
I've been seeing that a lot too around questioning teacher expertise. It's this whole idea that you can make a teacher-proof curriculum and pay an uneducated person who doesn't have a background in pedagogy to deliver this. That's not what real quality education is about. I absolutely agree with you. Expertise is being able to do the right thing at the right time for the right students almost instantaneously, and having not only a huge bag of tricks, but also knowing when to use them. I just love that, because we've been talking a lot about how do you develop that with teachers, and I think it's so important.
Yeah, and there is a place and time for a more structured curriculum or lesson plan. I'm looking at some of the jurisdictions globally that are really struggling with teacher recruitment, and you end up with a 13-year-old in front of the classroom and one master teacher maybe, or I'm thinking of Vicky Colbert's work with Escuela Nueva and the self-pacing guides, and realizing that they only had one teacher and then a lot of people that wanted to help, but without the expertise. So they needed to figure out a way to deliver it by using the teacher's expertise. And, there are some areas like that, and completely agree with you. And we're starting to see it in the Western Hemisphere and OECD countries when you're comparing urban to rural. Oftentimes in rural areas, they're missing some expertise and subject matter, especially in the high school level, where we now need to leverage some technology or some teachers that are in other areas. So I think we do see that on that front. It's a big battle as well between privatization and public education. Let's not kid ourselves. A true, strong public education that's well built and that has the professionals that's needed to deliver it costs money, and some people see it as an investment. Some people see it as a cost, and the governments that see it as a cost are trying to offload that cost as much as they can towards privatization. And privatizations, if they come in and they say that we can deliver it by taking a kid off the street with 6 weeks of training, or taking a graduate from university, give them 6 weeks of training, and we can put them in the worst social economic areas, that's going to cost you half the money, then they're going to look into that. And I think that's an issue that we need to push back on. Part of that is the managerial culture that's coming that's come into education through the late 90s, and then with the PISA and then the comparisons and then the perversion of the data that's coming out of those to try to compare ourselves to each other when the context really matters. What you're doing in Alberta or what we do in New Brunswick or what somebody does in Nova Scotia versus what's happening in Singapore or in Finland or in Chile is vastly different. And the contexts are different. The cultures are different. The governance is different. And all those things affect the classroom. And I think at the end of the day, that's going to be an issue if we don't realize we do need the expertise, and the expertise might look a bit different depending on where you are. I think another issue to that is as we're adding that managerial part to it, there's also a patriarchy and that is patronizing towards the workforce that is mostly female. And teachers oftentimes have kept their mouths shut throughout this because they are in service of students. They're in service of their community. It's not about showcasing what they do. And what we haven't realized, I think, as a profession is that I think we need to now, because if we don't, then we are going to be engulfed in what, these austerity measures and this privatization movement and so on, because they have large communication budgets. They have large marketing budgets, right?
No, I totally agree. I want to pick up on something you said a little bit earlier, and it was relating to learning environments. And so you were kind of thinking about and talking about how it's so difficult to compare different countries because of all of the different contextual factors. But I also think that there are some common threads around learning environments, and there are some ways that we can set up really powerful learning. And so even though the context might be different, there are some different things. What do you think about that? What are some of those things that you have seen that are universal to have great learning environments where we are getting students to develop their understanding of important concepts, and maybe even some of the things that you've experienced through the years about environments or ways that we can make learning better in terms of that are universal?
I think the first one is really setting the right culture. And culture is a living thing. I know it's not exactly the physical environment, but it's part of the environment. And Seymour Saracen, who is one of the top education researchers of all time, probably, who we all stand on his shoulders, he always talked about any change in education doesn't work if you don't look at culture first. And he was completely right. And it's the same thing for businesses, actually. You see a lot of businesses merge and then slash employees and not look at the culture and then not understanding how that affects production and so on. But in schools, the culture is a real living thing, and you live that culture every day. And setting the right culture, I believe, is extremely important. And that's different in elementary school. It's different in middle school. It's different in high school. It's different at university, for that matter. But it is quite similar across the board, across the world. Now, that being said, there are certain contexts and certain countries that have different governance structures and different approaches to family life that would also change that a bit from what I've seen in some of the contexts that I've been in. So I think that would be the first one, Corey, is really that. And then the second thing is use everything at your disposal to create a learning environment that's engaging for the child or for the student. You look at outdoor education. We are not confined to those four walls. And a walk in the park is often, or a walk in the woods is often something that's very beneficial. And you can do science by doing that. You can do social studies. You can do, there's all sorts of things you can do with that walk. And when I talked about creating the right culture, you're looking at, you could create circles, giving the student voice is extremely important, but then also agency and the autonomy. So as you're creating the culture of being able to, okay, these are the top 5 things you need to do this week. I'm going to be doing a mini lesson on Tuesday and Wednesday on this. You're going to have some free time here, here, and here. Let's showcase to you how to plan and how to attain those goals. So what's the priority? What's the second goal? What's the third? And then now you're giving them the ability to become lifelong learners, but also to own that learning, right? So I think the environment really starts with the culture. And then after that, use whatever is at your disposal to engage the children. Like if you're in the middle of London in England, I mean, there's no reason for you not to be doing constant trips outside of the school. You have so many resources out there. Now, that might be a bit harder in a rural area, but if you're in a rural area, when it comes to science, you probably have access to animals or to physical geography that other areas don't have access to. Why not you engage in that as well, right? It's really about understanding where you are, who you're teaching, what the cultures are, and then to leverage that to be able to really create an engaging environment for the child.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And being able to have taught in many different environments, I think many of the same things. I'm totally in line with you. Hey, you're a tech guy. I was wondering if you had a favorite app or a favorite website or maybe some other media that you like to turn people on to look towards, whether that's a teaching one or even in your personal life.
Well, I mean, my favorite website's ESPN, but that's not going to help you whatsoever. I've got some different ones that I do use for collaboration. Some that I have used in the past couple of years has been Evernote and Trello, which are used oftentimes. One of them we use in terms of our family to create checklists and so on. Another one I use more for my writing. Murals is a great website in terms of brainstorming within groups for collaboration. So if you're looking at more of that online collaboration space, the more we're doing with COVID-19, the more I'm realizing that in terms of teaching, it does have its major limitations, and that the school really cannot be replaced for many of the elements that we need. It can for like the top thriving 10% that would be able to do it no matter what, but for the other 90, and mind you, that top 10% would you need school for other reasons, but the other 90, not really. Other apps that I kind of use, I mean, Twitter is a great tool in terms of professional development, mainly for networking and the professional learning community. That you can engage with. That being said, you really need to watch out for polarization and only following what you want or what you like, because that'll bring you down a rabbit hole. But that's a tool that I use quite often enough in terms of discussion. One that I use on my Apple device would be Clips for short videos. Which is really interesting because you could build a year in the life of a student through 1 second clips a day. But there's also all sorts of other things that you can do to help communication and showcase to parents what's happening. Would you like one in terms of education, Corey?
Sure. Yeah. Whatever. This is already a great list. Whatever you kind of use. It's always, I find it always so interesting to see what others are using and finding valuable, to go out and try, and if we can maybe find them valuable as well.
Yeah. So we've been doing a lot with Spotify, actually, through getting kids engaged in showcasing who they are through their own personal mixtape. So if you're looking at your culture and the 7 elements of culture and which song would showcase that with your examples. So we use Spotify for music, which is not something often people would look at for that. There's a app called Explain Everything. It's Explain Everything. Yeah. So it's an app that sort of helps you. It's like a whiteboard. It helps you draw it out. You can use clips now. But as these phones evolve, the apps are evolving as well. There's many apps that you can do that on, but Explain Everything was a really good one as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have any books that you like to send or refer people to? Any books that you find yourself quoting a lot, or ones that you kind of treasure because you return to often?
Yeah, it really depends on who I'm referring it to. I mean, I'm big in coaching books, having been a coach for a very long period of time, and I refer back to John Wooden's sort of pyramid and his biography and how he approached coaching. Was never about approaching coaching from the sporting point of view, but from the humanity point of view is really what he approached it for. Books that I've been reading through education, Young Zhao is obviously one that really is in my wheelhouse and very much is aligned with what I think, which would also bring in Andy Hargreaves, Pak Tiang. Pak Tiang is mostly for, and Andy Hargreaves, both of them are mostly from a systems point of view in education and from a leadership point of view in education. And all three of those, I think, would be some that I would refer to from that end. In terms of pedagogy, Paulo Freire's book is obviously one that I believe in strongly in terms of public education and strong democracies. Some books that I've read lately, or in the last couple of years that I often quote as well, would be Ed Catmull's Creativity Inc., he used to be the leader at Pixar, still is, and now is also at Walt Disney. And mostly the quote that I often use that he uses is, if there's more truth in the hallways than there is in the boardroom, your company's in trouble. And in education, oftentimes that is the issue. There seems to be a misalignment of the communication. So it's a line that I use often. It's a great book as well to look at how to align the vision and mission and how to get feedback. So how to create communication feedback loops for your employees and your high performing directors, and how do you have those communications? So it was interesting on that front. And I think those ones would be the key ones that I'm reading at the moment. I've also gone through a lot of biographies, like Barack Obama's biography, Martin Luther King, and some of those major leaders.
That's great.
Sorry,
Sounds like we've got a third person in this interview. Yeah, sounds awesome.
Yeah, my little guy's been jumping into my interviews all over. He's been all over the world in the last 6 months, which has been kind of interesting.
I love it. I think that's another new reality that we've adjusted to. It always makes me smile. I find it. Everyone's always embarrassed or like they kind of get uptight about it, but I actually think that it's great.
Well, I had him with a friend of mine who used to be involved at a very high level with UNESCO, and I was interviewing her for a video webcast for Facebook, and he jumped right into the interview.
Hey, you got a background in sport and coaching, and so I'm wondering if that might be a part of this answer. But is there anything that you do every day or most days that helps you to be well and healthy and continue the good work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is always family. Particularly to keep the lines of communication with my wife always open, and making sure that any idea that I come up with that goes through her filtering and her acceptance first and foremost. And the main reason why is because, we're a team. So I think that's a key element of what I do to keep myself healthy, because healthy relationships are key to being able to perform. I think that's one. I've done I did a couple of Ironman, and physical training for me is extremely important. It helps me filter through my thoughts, but also keeps me happy and keeps me ready to go. And like anybody else, there's ups and downs with that. When life comes and hits you by the side of the head we had my mother-in-law passed away a couple of years ago. So we went through 5 years of her having pancreatic cancer. And towards the tail end of that, we were in the hospital quite often. So it's not something that I could concentrate on at that time. I had to put it aside for what was better for the family. But I've gotten back into it quite a lot. And I think that really helps. It's a bit the old adage of, you got to put the face mask on first before you put it on anybody else that you're traveling with in an airplane. And for teachers in particular, we struggle with that. We really struggle with putting that face mask on first because we're always being asked to help, and we're always wanting to help. And that's where our heart lies. But the truth of the matter is, if we don't take care of ourselves first, then we struggle. And I sort of go at it now from a point of view of my relationship with my wife is number one, and my own health sort of together. And I need to take care of those two. And then after that, it follows suit to my children. And then from there, anything that I can do. So little things like getting up early, going to train, from there, doing a bit of mindfulness, and then making sure that we have check-ins every day, morning and night, for our relationship to be healthy, and to take a getaway. We try to do one every three or 4 months. A good friend of mine who's an entrepreneur, who's very, very busy, does that with his wife and make sure that their relationship is still strong. So they do a little getaway every 3 or 4 months, guilt-free. And I think that's a priority.
Hey, what's next for you? I know that you're always working on something. It's one of the things I find so inspiring. What are some of the questions or problems or projects that you're looking at working on next?
To be honest with you, we just finished a crazy 2 weeks with the World Teacher Day and World Education Week and the Global Forum, and then making sure the scaffolding was all ready and up and running with my students. And it was a bit nuts. So this weekend is going to be quite quiet. But then I have my third book that I need to get done. The deadline's coming fast and furious. So that's probably the top of my list at the moment. And then to continue to help through advising, consultant, or collaboration with some major projects that are on the go globally, a few of them locally, and then continue to teach. I mean, those are the main ones, and then try to take care of my health. So yeah, it's never a dull moment, actually, would be the best way of looking at it. But those are sort of the priorities at the moment, is to try to finish my book, my third book, and then to continue to help with the collaborations that I'm helping with globally, and to advise, and then to take care of my health, and hopefully get out of this pandemic in relatively good shape.
Well, here's to hoping that you do, and I know that you're well placed for that. And I want to thank you so much for your time, for giving a little bit up of your of your free time. And I just can't thank you enough for sharing your insights, and just really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me, Corey, and you stay safe out there, and hopefully you have a good weekend.